Hi, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 806 New Social Environment.
Oh, wow.
I'm Carolyn, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Nancy Brooks Brody, Jo-ey Episalla, Carrie Yamaoka, Zoe Leonard, and Jill Casid. We are so thrilled to welcome writer Svetlana Kitto here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and host. Formed in New York City in 1991 through their immersion in AIDS activism during a decade of increasing mobilization around LGBTQ+ rights, Fierce Pussy brought lesbian identity and visibility directly into the streets. The collective used readily available resources, old typewriters, found photographs, their own baby pictures, and printers at their day jobs. And now I'll introduce the 4 core Fierce Pussy members who continue to work together today. Working across drawing, painting, and sculpture, Nancy Brooks Brody's work is non-representational and more recently site-determined, engaging with architecture as well as the body. Jo-ey Episalla is an interdisciplinary artist whose work repositions photographic and moving image media into the territory of sculpture. Carrie Yamaoka is a visual artist working with the transformational possibilities of form, perception, materiality, and process. Zoe Leonard is a visual artist working with photography, sculpture, and installation. And our host today, scholar and artist Jill Casid, is professor of visual studies in the departments of art history and gender and women's studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Casid is currently completing Necro Landscaping, the first part of the 2-book project on form at the edges of life. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I'll pass it over to you, Jill.
Thank you. What an amazing room for joining us and really making this convo electric. It's an honor to gather to think together out loud and in public. And I think of such convenings as the ongoing task of the amplifier. I was given the chance to witness each of the 7 chapters of Arms, Ache, Avid, Aeon, Nancy Brooks Brody, Jo-ey Episalla, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, Fierce Pussy Amplified, unfold from the 4 chapters at the Beeler Gallery in Columbus, Ohio in 2018-19, to the 5th chapter that transited to the ICA in Philadelphia in 2019, to chapter 6, which is taking the form of a book, and now into this consideration of the intersecting trajectory of chapter 7, an exhibition within the exhibition of Exposé that closes this Sunday. So any of you who have a chance to see it, I'm so excited to go for the closing, May 14, at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. Be on the alert, though, for Arms, Ache, Avid, Aeon as it makes its way in shifting constellation to New York City in 2024. A shout out here to Leah Ganjitano and Participant Inc., where Arms, Ache, Avid, Aeon, Chapter 8 will unfold at Participants' new location at 116 Elizabeth Street. This process of active witnessing to the unfolding chapters of Arms, Ache offered me the chance to think in a sustained way with the truly generous genius of artist and curator Jo-ey Tang's curatorial commitment to the slow, pliant labor of love of putting work in resonant and reverberating constellation across time, media, and technique that had yet to be put in direct spatial conversation before. Thus, before we turn to go into the reverberating room, that conduced, as it insinuated, in the apt characterization of Gillian McMenamin's must-read review of Exposé, just out in Texte zur Kunst. It's a piece titled In Defiance of Death is Finitude. McMenamin characterizes the exhibition within the exposition, the chapter 7 of Arms, Ache, as both a lesbian and queer and trans feminine presence and a kind of through line to the exhibition, as well as a sort of respite and aesthetic pause. And to really get into what that room is doing, we're going to start, though, with the new iteration of the collectives for the record made for the windows of the Palais de Tokyo. So I'm just going to share my screen and pull up that PowerPoint. So in starting with this new iteration made for the windows of the Palais de Tokyo, I want to emphasize that when something works so well that it seems inevitable, as if it were somehow always already like this, we may not take note of the radical labor of visionary recognition that I really want us to remark here, and have us really pause to recognize the commitment to risk in insisting on making time space for the iterative, with a collective in shifting affinity with individually pursued practices that resonate with one another without being collapsed in ways that also, and this is really important, hold space, including acoustic space for the experiential event of encounter that we could argue is the political work of making us perceptually alive to even the subtlest of shifts in orientation, the cracks in the homogeneous, the apertures in the closed off or impossible. And a tremendous instance of this would be, for the records, holding open the portal of a radical welcome that calls in with the power of the subjunctive, if she were alive today, if they were alive today, emphasizing that this is a collective that attracts co-conspirators, including between the living and the ostensibly dead. And we could say that in our convening today, this is a Zoom room full of the apparitions of and between art, AIDS, activism, ardor, and aesthetics that also spark recharged connections across the Atlantic. Exposé was conceived in honor of Elisabeth Lebovic's brilliant must-read, Ce que le sida m'a fait, or What AIDS Has Done to Me, Art and Activism at the End of the 20th Century, for which Fierce Pussy designed a version of For the Record, for the book jacket's inner lining. And I'm wanting the collective to speak to what this iteration for the record, both massive demonstration or manifestation without the universalized man, and importantly, a takeaway. So a printed version is also available to take away what it does in its translation, and especially at this moment in which our claims to our bodily autonomy are ever more vital and yet ever more challenged. And we could understand this insistence on the body and also the feminine and feminized body as a way to come together in vulnerable assembly, alive, joyful, and with this beautiful wheat pasted version of the poster work, this more than human scale that still daringly intimate in its summoning address to what would have been, could have been, or should have been, that is somehow insinuating even perhaps still here. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about For the Record, and then we'll go inside the show. And I have a few videos to give us a sense of the way that the arrangement really speaks to the architecture.
Who's up?
I start?
Yes, Carrie.
There were so many questions about how to approach these windows as we were working on them. You know, first of all, like, should the text be facing in towards the museum? Should it be facing out towards the public? How big should the type be? Should it be translated each sentence into French or not each sentence? Should they alternate? And also how to deal with the pronouns in French, and how to deal with the mullions and the architectural pilasters, and whether the text should read all the way down vertically and then to the next panel or across. And that was quite fascinating to have to think about all those things. It seems quite direct and simple, but actually there was much discussion and debate over that. Everybody else want to chime in there?
Yes, I could say a little bit more about the translation process and discussion, which feels really central to this work and how it was realized there. We invited Catherine Facerias to collaborate with us in making this version. Catherine translated the whole text. And then rather than having the same sentence in French and then in English, we decided to alternate them. So it's, you don't get the same sentences in both languages. So it's not really a translation. It became this kind of third space where you're constantly having to, we're asking the reader to move back and forth between what they know and what they don't know, what they recognize and what they don't recognize. Catherine was such an amazing collaborator because we were using slang and idiomatic language and trying to find real corollaries in the two languages. And also, as Carrie mentioned, the gendered nature of the French language was something we wanted to deal with in, radically and in a way that reflected our sense of ourselves in the world and our sense of a gender fluidity possibilities in the world. So Catherine helped a lot with that in the pronouns and in the ways the different words are conjugated.
And I would add to that, you can't quite see it in this image, but because we left some of the windows blank, you can see the outside, you can see the sky, you can see a bird go by, the trees. There's a kind of life that is happening outside and inside. And that was when Carrie talked about, we considered putting the type in reverse because it would be almost like from an internal place outward. We opted for this for several different reasons. We decided we really wanted to be readable and more accessible. Down on there's a stack of 3 crates down next to the doors where there's a takeaway, a giveaway with the piece there as well for people to have and take. And the other point I wanted to say about we did a site visit and decided where we would install this work. And we think of Fierce Pussy as the 5th artist in the group. And so this is her contribution to the show there. Thank you. Yes. And you pass by this piece as you enter and exit expose. So as in Elizabeth's book, where we took the inner page and outer page of her cover, the book, as in that photograph, it almost becomes sculptural. Yes, the text becomes, the book itself becomes like an object where the text runs through. Similarly, how we address the mullions and the doors itself, we kind of took from the way that we worked with this book as a physical object. So as you enter the show and as you exit the show and as you enter her book and as you exit her book, it is an echoing there.
I'd also like to say just about the layout of the windows. We were not offered this space to begin with, and we asked for the space, which is basically what Fierce Pussy does all the time, is basically insert ourselves in the best way possible. Can we go back to that image of the windows, Jill? And so there was a lot of consideration once we kind of convinced them that, yep, this would be a really not only a good idea, but as a way to not only reference Elizabeth's book, but to be in the book. And that way you have this passage through. And each one of those panels, I lay these things out for us. And so each one of those sections of like the 3 columns, there's 18 pieces of newsprint that have been wheat pasted to refit together. And so it was a bit of a puzzle trying to, lay this out on the computer and then print it out and then see how this was all going to fit. And I think what's very interesting about French to English, English to French, back and forth, is that as you take it in, there's also a fracturing. And a fracturing is also what time does. And there's a time element here. And I actually think that trying to make it out sensibility of looking at this allows to open up not only kind of other planes of time or history and what comes in the future, because the address or the voice is always a way for Fierce Pussy to include the larger public or people in general. And we feel that this text allows for anyone to insert themselves, even if they didn't live through the AIDS crisis in the early 90s. The voice is there to invite you in. Anybody can remember her being outside texting. If she was alive today, she'd be outside texting you, right? I mean, there's all these ways of bringing you in, or hopefully having a back and forth dialogue. And that other thing of fragmentation, for me, also allows for the idea of other languages or something much more large in the world, and how AIDS has affected the world. So just thought I'd add.
No, that was hugely important, and that incredible material labor of wheat pasting onto the windows. I loved the description of a different kind of massing that is still has distinction and moves across the ways that we're fractured spatially, geopolitically, temporally, but then a different kind of universal that feels hugely intimate in that and generous in that you. So with that, now you can see, of course, the way that getting a chance to always be opened onto every aspect of the conceptual and material and technical, as well as experiential, in discussing with you, gives you a sense of what's going to happen when we go into the room. So I'm going to stop the share here and bring up a couple of videos that will play very short to give you a sense of the arrangement of the rooms of Armsake, Avid Aeon within the expose show. So hold on one second and I will pull that up. Going to pull up the next one. And I'm now just going to pull up the PowerPoint, and then we'll have a chance to talk about how carefully considered the arrangement of the room is to really center the event of perceptual encounter as a key aspect of the political of the work, that is, rather than a content. Sorry, I'm just going to pull that up again. It's having a little bit of trouble. So here you can see the takeaway from for the record, and now here's the room. And I was especially hoping that we could start with the ways that the choreography of encounter is working here, the way that you're reorienting and really having us feel our body in the room, and making also space for our own experience in ways that are really key to, again, the way that the aesthetic is working politically. Would anyone like to?
Well, I think we should say that within all the chapters, the work can range from the late 80s to the present and all be within conversation at the same time. So each of the chapters has changed, and sometimes certain works get repeated, works get taken out, new works come in. And it's all about how we are in conversation with each other, all five of us. This is the first time that Fierce Pussy has been in the room with us. Up till now, there's been a third room where there was more archival work. But in this situation and in the exhibition of Expose, it felt like Fierce Pussy's contribution of the windows was quite a full gesture, and having the list poster be in the room with us felt also like it totally spoke to the work that we were all contributing and having dialogue about.
I think we are, if we haven't yet, also putting into the chat links to online full documentation of the unfolding chapters. Jo-ey Tang worked wonderfully hard to make sure that that slow conversation and shift, and of course the beautiful layered text that over the 4 chapters that the Beeler was palimpsested would be also archived publicly. So not only was there an archive room, but there is an archive of the unfolding chapters that lives online, part of that on Contemporary Art Daily.
I'd also like to add that we started working with Jo-ey back in 2013, just having conversations and studio visits. And he was the one that realized that here were these 4 artists who all had individual practices and worked collectively in Fierce Pussy, but that the 5 artists had never been shown together. And although I don't think we all started out with any idea that how that would become, eventually we did understand that there was all this communication to happen, and Jo-ey, in his incredible sensibility of slow working, slow curating, things that are very considered and thought about, things just started to manifest themselves. And by the first chapter, you had, we had all individual rooms, and then things started moving together and having these conversations, and Jo-ey was always very much and is very much a part of that.
one of the other gestures that I still love was not only did pieces start to move from each artist having their own individual room, including Fierce Pussy having their own room, but the moment when one work got layered on top of another, and I also found that to be such a intimate gesture. Also, just that kind of rub of the work that would be not only juxtaposed, but really insist on the wall in a felt and material way. And I loved the sense of your intimacy, but also frictions as a group so long and deep in conversation, and felt that was happening also in some of the moves. But then also the generosity here of giving so much space for us to feel our way and to have our own experience seems really delicious.
Well, at one point there was going to be even less work in the room than there is now in our discussions. But it's interesting because we spent over a year talking back and forth on Zoom, trying to pick work from each other's. And then we finally settled on a batch of work, but we didn't end up hanging every single one of the pieces that we planned, actually. So things were deleted and things were added at the last minute also. So I think it was really important to us to have that room, that wiggle room for flexibility, for changes that got made. And because so much was determined by the site itself in terms of how the work functioned in the room physically.
Well, I mean, that's perhaps, most obvious in the real work with the light and shadow created by the skylight, and you always work that way, but the results are so dramatic that the openness to having the architecture not just be in conversation, but become a kind of actant in the assemblage. So here we're getting even more of and notoriously difficult to photograph work because so much of it is about the experience and the ephemerality of that experience, and that. But
so,
here you can.
Want to say something?
Yes. It's sort of, I guess, related to both of the last few things that were said, and that I think the way that each of us work in our individual practice, and very much the way that we work together, it's not only about a selection of what the works are that are going to go into the space, but a real thinking about what the characteristics of the space are. We couldn't do it all together, but we went on several site visits to get to know this room that we were offered, and then built out the video room for Joy's video. But it was over multiple visits and communicating and thinking about how to engage with the space to allow the space to be what it is. And the skylight offered this incredible, we wanted the skylight uncovered. The first time I saw it, actually, it was covered, so we couldn't see the shadows. But when we realized that the shadows offered this sort of like a
sundial.
A sundial, exactly, of like watching time move around the room, and this beautiful, complicated pattern. But I think it's the engagement with architecture. I think where it really comes from, and where we try to take it, is about wanting to make space for the viewer. So I think it's a really deeply in the politics of our work. How we work with space is the politics of our work. It's about making space for you and allowing a viewer to have the maximum amount of agency and to be able to move around and feel attracted to a corner. And then we're thinking about the sound bleed from Joy's video. I think in some of the work, like in the list poster, and so are you, the politics are more on the surface in the language, but I think it's the whole expression of space and the invitation to the viewer that we offer. We're thinking about reflections, like we talked about that reflection in Slaughter History. We talked about the shadows, and that, yeah, I think the long consideration of the space and the density and what you referred to so beautifully as the choreography is really about making and inviting a relationship with the viewer that isn't forced and that doesn't push our work on them, but that invites viewers to come in and be part of the show in whatever way they want.
And the fact that we have the opportunity of time to work with these pieces, if we choose to, over and over again. For instance, Joy's large foldogram that's hanging in this way has hung in many different ways in other chapters. It's been on the floor, it's been across the completely unfolded along an entire wall. And it marks all the time of it being handled and rehung and changed and moved. My line that I installed has also been in every chapter thus far, and that's a measure. The length of that line is a measure that came originally from the Beeler. And it's almost like it has slid through these different spaces, and it's different every time as well. And it's installed, it's a site-specific installation. It's hung in a very specific way each time, a very considered way. And there's no one, for much of these works, there's no one singular vantage point. I think this is speaking to the aspect of choreography that Zoe was talking about. It doesn't, I'll speak for my own piece of the corner line in this case. It changes as you move in, out, over, against the wall. You can put yourself in the corner. You can look out from the corner. There's not one sweet spot. There's different it gives you an opportunity to find your way within the work. And I think similarly with much of the works, Joy's pieces like that, Carrie's pieces, how that angle is set on the floor can change. And it's constantly reflecting light in a different way all the time. And as you move around her piece, it's always changing. And so while the works are very, very different, there's a way in which there's these relationships that you can find. The physicality of Joy's piece, I feel echoes in Zoe's prologue photographs of the river, the surface of this the river kind of moving and churning has that echoing, or even the drawing that I hung from the early 90s, 91, it has like a curve and a bend to it. And the surface of Zoe's fruit, it relates to the skin piece that Carrie hung. There's many different ways of finding your way through the show, through the room, and moving from one piece to the other. There's lots of different connections that one can find. And the fact that it's housed, this particular iteration, this chapter, this show within a show, it's nested and held within the larger exhibition and within Elizabeth's book. And of that time that Fierce Pussy coalesced and began working together, we met, well, we didn't meet, but Fierce Pussy met at ACT UP. And this
1991.
The first chapter that's placed within that context. So, and that list poster is it's a remix, but of an original piece from 1991 as well.
Which at that time ended, instead of "Are so are you," it was the list of these derogatory terms that we took back. And the last line would say, "and proud," the original lists. And so in 2008, we decided to do a remix of the 3 lists. There were 3 originals, and so this became the singular one. Also, none of the work is static. Everything changes, not only from if you took a picture of something, it's never going to look that way when you see it. Your movement, the viewer's movement in the room around any of the pieces really changes dramatically. And so changes your perception. And that idea of changing perception or consideration, I think, is really important right now.
I think there are so many references to time embedded in so many of the works, whether it's, from Zoe's fruit, which the fruit was consumed and then repaired and then put back together and decayed over a long, long period of time. Or in the case of my 2-part piece where I've peeled a work from 1997 and last year, I peeled this work, sort of akin to how you might peel a Polaroid back in the day, and revealed what had not been previously seen. So that there's time in there. There's time in Joy's foldogram, for sure, in Brody's line, in even showing the peeling back of the body from also a long time ago. It's sort of, all of the work is brought into the present moment, though, which is interesting, because it defies some art historical ideas of chronology too.
And that whole idea of time and process. Process is important to all of us. In the foldogram, the foldogram is not an image. The foldogram is made from its process, and the white lines that or these cracks that you're seeing is actually the emulsion cracked and the white substrate showing through. And in each iteration, there becomes more folds and more cracks. And so it has its history, but it's constantly moving forward, fold to gram. There's always this forward movement, but it's always echoing what's behind, and then hopefully what can come in the future. And actually the same thing happens in some ways in the video. As long as there's you, as long as there's me, which is playing in this secondary room to this larger room. It's made up of footage, things that I've shot over an 18-year period that I've considered over a long time, and the way in which they come together, it's moments and things that have happened. I think about it as sort of non-performance, but it's about time. And there's a way in which some of the people, some people in it I know, some animals I know, some animals I don't know, some people I don't know. There's time and place, and almost like the sense of going on a trip, and you're seeing things that maybe everyone has these things that they see maybe out of the corner of their eye and they catch. And I'm just taking you on this kind of this road trip journey a little bit. And there's an echoing in all of this that reverberates back and forth between the sound and the way in which the visual works.
This seems like a good time to show the clip from the video. I'm just going to stop the PowerPoint share and pull that up. Just one moment. Here we go. And I know that I really think of this work as a choreography, but I also very much think of it as a chronography, that there's a working of time that's not historical, but it doesn't fix things in time, but is instead interested in the effects of time and the transformations that happen over time. And there's a kind of resilience here that isn't about that version of somehow getting outside of time to the immortal, but is willing to be enfleshed and in some ways done by time, that feels really exciting. So I'm going to share the video clip.
Each day we rode bikes from the 6th arrondissement where we were staying to work in the darkroom in Ivry, just beyond the outer ring of the city walls of Paris. Always the same route. Until that one day, as we were riding through the stone underpass and heard a voice reverberating off the vaulted wall.
We also have to say that that was very choppy, and I'm guessing it's just a signal thing, but it's much smoother than that.
Well, we can blame that on my my system. Apologies.
No, I think it might have to do with the whole Zoom thing. So no worries.
I actually wanted to say something, if I could, about, or to add something to this, the conversation about time. And I think it's about this recurrence of time as a theme. I think I just wanted to say that it's not so much for me time in the abstract as a kind of abstract clock, but about living, about the lived. When we were talking about Joy's foldogram and the cracks, it's about lifespan and living, and how what happens with a body in time, what happens to one's body in time. And there's something that I think runs through all of our work that has to do, even when Brody was talking about the measure, there is a measure that's a actual measure, but it has to do with the relationship to human form and the human body and lived experience. And like with the sown fruit, they now register I think those are the first two oranges I sewed up, and later that became a practice that turned into a bigger piece. I think it was maybe 1993. And so they show the effects of that, of the years, of the time. But I think it's something really specific about time. It's about both the resilience and the fragility of a body, about the relatively short duration of a human life that makes it so sweet and so difficult. And that is so much, I think, the four of us together, and Carrie said this beautiful thing about the sort of peeling back, this very older work, revisiting and then sort of peeling it back and holding these two different times at once. And together, I think for the record, those instances are about not like the dramatic milestones that might be lauded in kind of like contemporary sort of like heteronormative culture. It's about the little moments. It's about, oh, they'd be going out for a cigarette. Oh, you'd still be sharing an office. Oh, she'd be outside texting. It's really about this quality of the lived life. And I think that, oh, I'm so glad you stopped there with the people in the doorway so you could see the scale of that. I think it's this, it's related to this thing I was saying before about making space for the body of the viewer, and thinking about the many ways in which we share space and time during a lifespan, that it's not endless. It can feel that way. It might be on other planes, but that we're kind of living in body time, if that, yeah. It's about life, it's about lifespan and lived time, really experienced time.
And also there's the time of all of our relationships to each other and how long we've known each other, and knowing Elizabeth and Katrine in the mix of all this, and Elizabeth's book and all the things that she is putting forth. There's an echo here. It's an echo of that time in the early 90s of the AIDS crisis, all the people that we've lost, to the now. We are the witnesses. And so we bring forward what happened, but we also say we're here now, and what happens within that. That's where there's like not only a question, but a wonderful conversation going on, and that we've been able to have this conversation continue over so many years and get to add to it. I just feel really lucky.
As long as there's you, you
Exactly.
said it in the title.
That's correct. That's correct.
I mean, it just feels so deeply committed to a social that isn't an image of the social, but a doing of the social, and a social that's, is, you put so beautifully, lived in all of that very physical vulnerability and very material vulnerability that is also a source of great joy and pleasure too. So that affective unsettlement or bringing together of different modes of feeling also feels like a key aspect of what's happening in terms of time. So these aren't separated into different moments of a life. They're all in the same room.
And so
grief and joy, yeah.
Like Joy was talking earlier, I think it was Joy, about revisiting older works. And like with For the Record, I think it was 2013 that we did the first iteration, but actually we wrote the original text that was based on in 2010 for another work that was called Get Up Everybody and Sing. And then, so we allow ourselves always to move back and forth in time and to take take ideas or phrases or refrains or certain works that remain important to us and rethink them in the present moment. So it's kind of a refusal of that was then and this is now. And I think even so much of what the For the Record is about, it's about deeply missing the people that we lost and imagining, knowing that we're here now and we're getting to be like, oh, what is it like to be 50? What is it like to be 60? What is it like to be alive through the pandemic? What is it like to be alive in 2023? But it's also saying that in some way they're also still here, that we're still bringing them with us, that they're not, that they're active and not, that then is still now. That makes any sense. We're bringing then into.
Absolutely. But also in what feels like a very material way. I mean, even the material trace of having touched and also having been shaped by and dented by and also the good ways. I am wondering, I'm being mindful of time, the sense of holding space for what in a deeply Western sense that, you know, somehow we can't have the dead here, that it's, you know, either it's a ghost story or a haunting or the spectral. I feel like you managed to refuse that horror aesthetic while at the same time giving us a sense of real presence, including the felt presence of absence and working with voids in the work. And I know that there's a video that I haven't shown yet, which is of the cubes. Brody, would this be a good moment to show that?
One thing that I was just thinking about isn't 100% related directly, but the corner line is just so that people know it's actually carved out and embedded into the wall itself. It's fitted in. Like, I went to Paris 4 days ahead of everyone so that I could do that work because the amount of time that it takes to install that piece. And it's very different than having it just sit on the wall. It actually becomes part of the wall. And ideally it asks one to consider the entire room itself and the wall. So it's embedding and kind of asserting into a space one doesn't normally like occupy, quote unquote, but it's also not dominating. It's becoming part of, and it really changes when there's something next to it, when it's alone in the space, when the space is smaller. I mean, it changes every time. It's my interest in it is that it's always shifting. I somehow feel like that relates to this moving into space and claiming space, and I think being present in a way too, in a different kind of a way. But yeah,
well,
you can
and I don't know if this is something that you want to speak to, Brody, but the height at which it's placed feels really important, even though one's experience of that changes dramatically. There's also a way in which I feel like it implies not a necessarily sexed or gendered body, but a particularly sized body. The fact that it's there's a level on the wall that feels really important to me. But
yes, and that has changed over time, different iterations, it changes. But I took a lot of time figuring out where this would be in height, and it begins on the right side. It's actually centered on the wall. And then the height is a very particular height in relation to the body and in relation to the architecture of the room and the doorway leading into Joy's space. There's echoing of the architecture is echoed in the space.
And this isn't necessarily the most obvious place to open up to questions, but I'm mindful that we are at 2. I had wanted to show the video of the experience of the
very short.
So I'm just gonna maybe show that and then invite questions at the same time. So hold on one second, and I'm just going to show this clip. So I there's so much to say there, but the delicacy and whimsy of those, but also the poignant void feels, you know, a really significant maybe place to start thinking about also the ways that the politics of the work is also a mode of address that sometimes it speaks very directly to a you, but is also a form of address in the choreography and chronography of the way that you work. Do we have some questions?
Yeah.
We're so honored to.
No, yeah, thank you all for this conversation. We could use at least another hour, I feel. But we do have a few questions here, and if anybody does have an additional question, feel free to use the raise your hand thing, or just raise your hand or put it in the chat. But our first one is from Barnana, and you should be able to unmute to ask your question. Barnana is here.
Hey everyone, my name is Barnana Boiddo and I am from India. So what I wanted to ask, that in the very beginning of the conversation, it was started with the very introduction shown in the windows of the gallery. So my question was why the visualization of the text is done on the windows and nowhere else? Was it intentional, to symbolize anything, or it was just for the sake of space?
Well, I would say that the windows are a transitional space, right, between inside and outside, and that the newsprint that the work is printed on is not absolutely opaque. So it actually allows light to come through it. So all of those material and formal considerations were important to us.
And it exists throughout the there are several places throughout the exhibition where we had stacks, crates, milk crates stacked with the giveaway on top of it. So it wasn't just in that one location. So the piece is in other spaces, just not wheat pasted.
And the other thing that happens when you wheat paste is it's almost like skin. There's a real tactility to it, which again references the body, and it references the body of Elizabeth's book. And as Elizabeth's book is the core of what expose, the entire exhibition is coming from, in certain ways of reflection and also multiplication and other ways of looking. It's the starting point to open up this exhibition, coming from many different artists' ways of thinking about that period of time. So I think we were thinking that that transitional space of walking down these steps and the lights, meaning the window panes allowing light, and then the text being the text that was also within the book, became a space where you start out from and maybe you acclimate yourself. And so yeah, it had a lot to do with the viewer and the viewer's experience of the entire exhibition.
And I would add to that, I think there's this quality that Joy was talking about of the version that we made for Elizabeth's book that was an end papers, and that kind of enveloped the reader, but also proposed to the reader this way that they, you had to flip from back to front, you had to sort of move to continue this sentence. So we were engaging with a fracturing while also engaging with an envelopment. As a few people have mentioned, you see the window on your way in and on your way out. So it was a kind of physical rhyming with the gesture of the end papers. But also, I think there's something that always happens when you're making a new work, especially a site-specific work. You start with an idea, and then you always end up adapting and changing, because that's kind of how life works.
Yes.
And that's definitely how museums work. This bank of windows actually continues way down this whole other wing where there's a huge long arcing wall of windows that overlooks this central plaza that's very formal, but now has informally kind of become a skate park for a lot of young people who, there's like a whole crew of people that skate there and that hang out there and that socialize there. It's super, super social space right outside those windows. And initially, our initial idea was to engage not this section of window where we ended up making it, but this other section that's really active with all these skating, skate kids. And we were thinking about facing the text out. And eventually those spaces weren't available to us because the Palais de Tokyo hosts a lot of events in order to support the museum. So there's always these kind of other factors behind the scenes. I think a visitor to a museum, you think that everything that happens was exactly the way the artist envisioned it, but it always ends up being a kind of a collaboration or negotiation with what's possible in the time and the budget and the parameters that you have with an institution. So those windows were not available. We had a whole long conversation about them, and then it was no windows at all. And then a couple of months later, it was oh, you can have these windows. And at that point, we realized that they would be, they wouldn't be seen by as many people from the outside, because there's a kind of covered cafe there where there isn't a good sight line. But that from the inside, if we turn the text, that you could read it from the inside, you would see it when you first entered, you would see it all the way going down the stairs to the show, but you would also have this amazing view of it from this kind of mezzanine when you go up to this other show, which was a Miriam Khan show, or when you go up to the cafe area. So we realized it would play a very different role than what we'd imagined, but an equally kind of important and hopefully moving one. And so we adapted our initial idea to suit what the museum was able to offer. And I go through that long explanation just because I think there's something about the way that artists work that people often don't understand, which is that you're constantly in this sort of like, here's what I want to do, my idea, and then here's like money, time, budget, parameters, limitations, what I'm allowed to do. And you can either drop it and say, or what we tend to do is we're like, the four of us are quite persistent and quite flexible. We're interested in all these ideas around adaptation and change. And so we're like, oh, okay, this is the new parameter. And then it turned out like, I think so beautiful with all of these effects that everyone else has mentioned, the skin-like quality. And as Brody mentioned earlier, which I think was so important, leaving those banks of windows open on either side. Initially, we had wanted to make the piece bigger, but you couldn't actually reach them because of some architectural elements. So we adapted once again, and then we realized it made the piece better because you could see the corner of the building across the plaza, and you could see birds and trees and life and wind, and it made the piece so much better to have this sense of activity. And we made a very pointed decision early on to not cover the doors so that you were always seeing people moving and coming in and out and walking across the plaza. So you'd always have both a sense of scale and a sense of that kind of like really mundane daily life lived time that we were talking about before. So sorry for that really long explanation, but I think it's like, that's what making art is often about, that you don't get to do your first idea, but if you stick with it, you know, you can make something really meaningful.
Amazing, thank you. Thanks for that question so much, Fernanda. Our next question is going to be from Anna. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hi, thank you everyone so much for this conversation today. I have a question specifically for Zoe, and I'm wondering how or what you thought about exhibiting fruit under glass in this iteration, and how the social implications of that form might rub up against other works such as Strange Fruit as it was installed in the Whitney.
Thanks, Anna, for that question. It's kind of related to what I was saying before about like the parameters of working within a museum. The piece that was shown at the Whitney is one work. When I originally made it, viewers were not only allowed but invited to walk through it. But over time, the pieces got very fragile, and there were a few accidents that were kind of just sort of, you know, sad to see things get crushed. And so it was shown behind a stanchion, but without any glass, and where you can see and actually even smell the work a little bit. These two pieces of fruit that are shown here are the first two pieces of fruit that I sewed that eventually kind of led to Strange Fruit. And they've just been sitting on like my bookshelf in my apartment for however many, 30 years. So I've treated them very casually over time, but I realized when I showed them publicly for the first time a couple of years ago, that they were really, they have a lot of sentimental value to me. And I felt like I wanted to be, I didn't want them to be either stolen or damaged in the process. And in order to show them safely, where they couldn't be, there isn't a lot of like the Palais has limited guards and people circulating to guard the work, and these are very small and very light and super easy to grab. And so recognizing that it's a busy museum on a weekend, on a Saturday, there can be 5,000 visitors to the museum. I felt like I had to make a kind of compromise to show the work, but still protect the work. And so, yeah, so I designed a kind of size and shape of a support that I thought looked okay. These used to go on a shelf, and if you wanted to not put a bonnet on it, the shelf would have to be like super, super wide. And so the trade-off for me was putting a plexiglass cover on it allows you to lean over and see it very, very, very closely without there being the risk of it being either damaged or stolen, or just having the kind of wear and tear that happens with dust and humidity over a long exhibition in a larger public institution. So yeah, it was weighing out the various things, and it does make it a bit more into a relic as opposed to a kind of raw living thing, which I've held on to with Strange Fruit. But it felt worth it. It felt like a trade-off that was worth it to be able to show it at all. I hope that answers it.
Great, thank you, Anna, for your question, and thanks so much, Zoe. The next question is from Ksenia Soboliva. Let's see, I'm going to ask on her behalf. So Ksenia writes, so much of your work speaks to time as a body. I'm wondering how your sense of time has changed as your own bodies have occupied more time over the years. If time felt collapsed when you first started working together, does it feel strangely elastic now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I think is really wonderful is that because we've all known each other for over 30 years, not longer.
Maybe a little longer.
40. It's probably more like 40. But who's counting? Let's start there. Yeah, time is elastic in a way. And what's wonderful is that we can not only be in the moment with each other, but we can move back and forth through time and into the present. And so it allows for a lot of richness. And I think we gain a lot from our history, as well as just being with each other, literally in the moment, in whatever moment. And I think that, I don't know if that answers the question or not, but there's a way in which there's a kind of magic that happens between the four of us and the five of us. And it's super important, and it's super giving. It's very generous. It's a balance. A lot of love.
Great. I love that answer. Thank you, Ksenia. Let's see that we just, oh, here, I'm going to unmute Toppled Monuments Archive for their question. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, I think actually this is like kind of a, maybe can build off of what you just said from Ksenia's question, but I was interested about how sculpture sort of became the medium that all of these practices converged together. And I'm really interested in sculpture in my own work because it has this particular relationship with the body and also monumentality. So there's a lot of different desires embedded in sculpture. And then going off of what Jill said about how everything is choreographed and making space for other bodies, in this exhibition. I guess I was just curious how sculpture plays a part for you individually and collectively, and if it's something that you arrived at, or it kind of came into being because it just makes so much sense. And I was thinking about the photographic works and how they have a sculptural quality, and the video being so much about space. So, you know, anything about that would be wonderful.
I think all four of us work in a way that's quite hybrid. Like, none of us are strictly photographers or strictly painters or strictly drawers or strictly sculptors even. So even, I mean, for example, I think all of the work in this particular chapter does function sculpturally, except maybe Zoe's line of water photographs and my photograph of slaughter history. But Zoe's line of water photographs, because it addresses the paradox, that really sort of key paradox of capturing something moving, it kind of transcends the representation of water. And because the viewer moves along the line from one photograph to the next, it almost manifests sculpturally. So I think we're all interested in that area, that sort of in-between area of disciplines that are not strictly one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Carrie. And I would add, in terms of like the hybrid aspect, for me, when I made the first cube, it was I made it and I looked at it and I was like, is this something or is this nothing? Like, is this anything? Did I just make art? You know, like, because it was such I hung it on my wall, and it's like the physicalizing of a drawing. It's that drawing that everyone makes, right? The two squares that then you connect the lines. As a child, we all do that drawing. We make this drawing, and it's like we're learning how to make something in 3D, something 2D. We're seeing a dimensionality of something in a two-dimensional. So I made it into a 3D, and it very much feels like body to me. I mean, even there are early learning to draw books where the body is broken down into cubes and twisted in different ways. So I'm still, it's a very new piece for me. I didn't even know if it was a piece or not, in all honesty. I hung them horizontally on my wall in my home, and I found them very calming to look at, and I really like seeing them. And I originally was going to hang them in a line in this space, but with my line and Zoe's line of photographs and just what the space allowed, I did decide to hang them in a vertical, which I was hesitant to do because I didn't want it to become too much like turning them into art. Like, they're really odd pieces. They're the quality of the wire, the gauge that I chose, it's very much like a drawing. So, and I'll just say, I mean, and also the line itself that's embedded in the wall, it's like a physicalized line, a line with a top and a bottom, or a line with form. Like, we don't think of a single line as having form. Like a drawn line it's a shape.
It's physical. There's a physicality to all the works, I think. And that physicality is where it dips into sculpture, and there's this movement back and forth. There's that space between, it's sort of like if you lean something up against the wall and it sits on the floor. What's that space between? That's the place I've always found super exciting. It goes back to that thing I said before. It's like, let's say you're reading a book, you're reading Elizabeth's book, and you look up for a second and your eye sees something else, but your eye brings that back. Your mind brings that back to the page. And it's that space. That's the space in the in as long as there's you, as long as there's me. Those are the spaces that the foldogram can occupy, because it can become many different things in the way it relates to the space in which it's in. So it is site specific, but and it can allow for a number of things in its physicality. I think it really relates very much so to the flow of the river in a way, in Zoe's in prologue there. I think you'll see this if you're in the space. To me, it's almost as if they were windows and looking through onto the river. It's the river. The river is there. It goes on forever, as water does. And in my mind, the foldogram being a whole roll of photographic silver gelatin paper, it goes on. It was just cut from a roll that was even bigger. You know, there's this way in which all of it can go on forever. I don't know exactly how to, I don't even want to quantify that. I think all of the spaces that we allow for, that sculptural space, whether it be the chest ripped open, that's another void, another space. In Carrie's two-part piece, not only the relationship between these two parts, and one on the wall, one on the floor, but what happens when you move into that space, that magnified, reflective space. You go somewhere else. The line is slipping through the actual wall.
I'm realizing we never talked about Carrie's skin piece.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It relates a little bit to what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Now, which is like the imprint of a surface post being on, like the, actually, Carrie, could you talk about this work for a minute? Because I think it has a really nice relationship to what we're talking about.
Sure. What it is flexible resin that's like a kind of rubber that's tinted with titanium white, and it was rolled onto a plastic surface, and it kind of crawled a little bit, which is where you see those kind of holes and that very delicate edge. And then when it dried, I peeled it off the surface that I made it on and tacked it on the wall, because I was way more interested in this skin than I was in the thing that starts to look like a picture when it sits on a wall. And all of that, I was interested in the fragility and frailty of that edge and the sort of the delicateness of it. And also all of the many implications of skin, you know, all of the different directions you could go in, but that with calling it skin when it's really not skin. But yeah.
I also think it's very important what you said about you're not interested in the picture that it might make. You're interested in the physicality of it, and then what happens when it is in different spaces and gets hung. Those relationships also queue up with the foldograms, because there's this way as it's not about picture. We're not giving you a moment in time. We're not capturing anything in a sense. In any of the works, even the river. I mean, you could look at those surfaces of those photographs, quote unquote photographs, but they take you somewhere else. It's also a very strange, the color of these, they're very tactile. There's a movement there, and that movement plays out within the space between the skin piece of Carrie's. With the foldogram, I mean, there's this way in which we're not telling you what to look at. We're letting you, the viewer, have your experience. And that experience is a kind of physicality. It's physical.
And there's something about, I think, transformation. In Carrie's skin, it has this kind of memory of a plane, right? It has a memory of like a rigid, flat plane and then it's been peeled off of there. So it sort of has that memory, but then you're putting it back on a different plane. So it's both, it's not about the plane, but it's about this other possibility of the possibility of transmutation, or things changing their shape over time or under different sets of conditions. And this is I also think when you look at this, you're wondering, like, well, what's it going to do next?
Yeah.
Is it going to take another form later? And I think it's not decisively a sculpture. It's allowing itself to indicate all these different possible shapes and things that it could be. So there's, to me, also not only something very queer in that, but something very radical in that, about the idea that materials are not as stable as we sometimes pretend they are, that things are moving and shifting on a molecular level. And in the space of change is also the potential for the space of other kinds of change. Potential for social change, for political change, for relational change between people. So it's using an abstract materiality to get at the possibilities of revolution, of radical re-expression of what it means to be human. Yeah.
And I think also that move from what the picture could be, the moving away from the representational, where the abstraction, right? That you're moving away from the representational, then allows for space for queer people, for space for difference, for space for social change. So I think that's the other, exactly what you're saying, Zoe, of, there's this kind of, I don't know, I think belief on our part.
So great, thank you. Thank you for that incredible question. And our just last one today will be from Chloe, our director. So I'll turn it over to you, Chloe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation today. It's been really a pleasure to listen to. I just wanted to ask about the title of this series, which has gone on, Arms Ache, Avid, Aeon, which I know originates from your work in 1991, Carrie. And it really, to me, I've been sitting with it for a long time, and it really encapsulates what it means to examine a body made through the space between those words, and through the space invited by your work and innate to your collaboration together, and how you listen to one another, which has been really present throughout this conversation. And I wonder how your relationship to those 4 words has changed over the course of this project.
Oh, what a question.
A great question.
I seem to remember that when we started discussing that as the title for the project, that there was a lot of uncertainty about that as a title, and it felt like a little bit risky to call it that. And I would say that over time, it feels more right somehow.
I think it's been very generative. I think Jo-ey also really lit on that and had an understanding of it in some way. I think in looking at Carrie's work, where it came from, and also just in discussions that we were having, I think it has been very generative. It ends up meaning a lot of different things in different contexts.
Also, those 4 words were originally sourced from typewriter correction ribbons that I collected, and it was language that was deleted, and then I made a lexicon of all the words that were deleted from people's correspondence. And Arms Ache, Avid, Aeon was taken from that, culled from that lexicon. So there's a kind of, it's sort of interesting that we're taking language that was just in the garbage bin and kind of bringing it back out.
Of course we are. Of course you are.
I also really love about it that it's not like illustrating or summing up what the project is. And that I say project because there are exhibitions, there may be a book, but the project as a whole is like every single conversation that we have and all of the different works that enter into this conversation over time. And I like that people are often, like, what was that? What was that title? And they don't quite get it at first. And so it frustrates the, I think not in a way to be mean, but I think this like delivery of art that's expected to be like, ta-da, like here it is, and here's the name, and it's catchy, and it's a great commercial name, and everyone will, just there's a kind of set of demands around what art is often asked to produce and be part of, even within institutions, to have a certain kind of like this 1-2, this is what it is, and you get it all in one glance and everybody knows. So I think this is such a perfectly beautiful title because you muse on it, and we among us, because it's long to say, and every time we're having a conversation about Arms Ache, Avid, Aeon, so we're like A, but that's also kind of awkward to say, and so we're kind of like A, but I think I say that with like love, because I think it's a reminder that really crucial parts of living and really crucial parts of communication happen in these subtler registers that you have to make yourself present for, and you have to make yourself patient for, and that you may notice connections over time that you didn't notice right away. And it's not like the thing, it's the, I don't know, it's the poetics of it, but it's also the patience of it, and the kind of way that it lets you know right away, we're not going to take you into a show that's going to be like, work space in a line, and you're going to be entering into something that is interactive and that unfolds over time and that is suggestive and that is welcoming. Arms is a generous opening word.
I think that's a really good response, Zoe, because also when you're saying that, I keep thinking about how immediately it makes you slow down. Mm-hmm. Like you take it in and you have to think about it. Well, once you're in the head of thinking about something, then when you start to look, you're also allowing yourself time. And I think all of our work, that maybe the thing that is asked is that you slow down and look. And I think Jo-ey is very keen and key to that.
Yeah, the title brings a terrific openness. It just doesn't feel like an end point.
Right.
Feels like something you move through. And it does feel very poetic to me. And it made sense when Jo-ey offered that as an idea, and have it to be rooted in one of Carrie's works and in one of our works. it made sense. It fit. We just landed on that. And we were going to hang it originally. We thought we'd show it. And I don't know that we ever did.
We did at the Beeler.
Very beginning, the very, very beginning. Yep. And then some of that, why I don't always remember that, is because so many works come and go. We're constantly putting something up and taking it down. And that's a real gift to getting to work this way as well. Because I think as artists, we're always, well, what if I put it next to this? What if I move it over here? If I put it 2 inches that way, or maybe I cover it up. It's a lot of trust is in there with each other around how we hang our work together next to each other, what we put in, what we take out. Yeah, it's a very big gift, that a way to work, because it's a way that we work alone, and then it's a way that we work together as well. And I think a lot of people probably relate to that in their own practices around movement or writing, or all kinds of way of creating and making.
I just wanted to say, as we're looking at this image, I mean, when you're looking at Brody's line, and then when you look at the doorway, you see the other piece of Brody's, which is diamond on diamond. And what's interesting is it's also a way of leading you into where the my video piece is, but also it's another portal in a way. It's another incised shape into the wall, like another space to go to. Just wanted to reference it.
Yeah, that's also embedded into the wall.
And where you see it there, that's from inside of Joy's video. So we actually moved it together, like kept, Brody suggested a place, and then we kind of collectively were like, well, how about here? How about here? And we kind of moved it back a little bit so that when you were in Joy's video room, it kind of offered this almost like a ricochet point, like that would bring you back into the other room or remind you of the other room. And it would be this kind of, that it was a way of bringing the larger room into Joy's room. And then when you were done seeing the video, you're like, oh, it kind of had this connective, it had a really interesting role there. Super beautiful.
Also, there's like that echo, right? So of like when you're in the larger room, you're hearing the audio of the video.
Totally.
And then it, eventually it brings you back and you see the diamond on diamond, and it brings you into the space, and then you come and you view the video, and then you're sort of filled maybe with some of that, and now you come back out to the diamond on diamond into the larger room, and then another level of experience takes place with all those works from your experience of however you've been viewing, I think, or listening. There's just these back and forth echoes.
Mm-hmm. And the shape of the diamond on diamond echoed very much the negative space of the body. And that drawing is from 91. And it's this unmoored figure on a figure unmoored on a page. And the diamond on diamond is also unmoored in space as well, which is just, made so far apart from one another, but brought in relation here.
It actually kind of makes me want to, it was something I thought about earlier that maybe applies here, which is that I think a lot of people would describe the installation as minimal. Like, I think there are 12 works total, I think. Maybe it's 13, I don't know, but including Joy's video. But I think a way that we tend to pare back, but certainly in this show, the paring back to this group of works was actually, I think, about honing or sharpening or making more evident the different kinds of connections between the various works, so that it wasn't about how much work can we fit into this space, but how many different connections can be made from each work to each of the other works. And some are more obvious than others, but after a while, you began to almost feel this kind of network. We were in this room after having done the site visits and the build out. We were in this room for 5 full days, placing these works before we started hanging anything, and just moving things around. And we omitted a couple of things and then put in something we hadn't been sure about. So like the connection from the kind of roiling, turning curves of Joy's foldogram might be connect obviously to the waters, or the there might be some connections that one makes really quickly, but then I think these other connections that you see over more time, and you see because there isn't a lot of other stuff in the way of it. And so that really subtle diamond, non-diamond that brings you back out, you can hold in your mind that shape that you've seen in the open body. And you can make the connection to like the embeddedness of that, the embeddedness of the line, and the kind of cast of the plane in the skin. And then you can go from the skin to the fruit skin, and you can go from that to the peeled 2-part work. And so in a way, paring it back gave you more in a way, rather than like adding more work would have taken away some of the potential of those different kinds of connections between the work. And Diamond on Diamond, I think, does that in a very subtle way. Like when we moved it back a little further, where it's less of a presence from the front room, but becomes this really major presence from Joy's video room back into the main room. It is this surprise and kind of adds another layer. It's super beautiful.
And I also think we have to comment on the sundial. I mean,
exactly. Yes.
I mean, we knew right away, like we wanted to uncover the skylights because they had them all covered, and you know, we were really happy that we were able to do this. But then that fact that because it's the expose has been up since February and now till May, and you had the shadow that worked its way around the room, it's like another film. It's the sun's film, the sundial within this space. So it's, again, here's time passing, here's the change in light, here's life, here's, you know, this incredible patterning that constantly changes and is also echoed in a lot of the works. And in fact, even in the video, there's a section that is absolutely almost very similar to this, that happens to be the shadows of going under a bridge on the road. And I mean, it was just, I had no idea, but there's all these other connections that you make visually.
Yes.
It also means that no 2 viewers ever see exactly the same show.
Exactly.
It's kind of incredible because the sun's shadow isn't the same every day. And the spring is such an active time as the days are really rapidly lengthening and the angle of the sun is changing. Like we're getting, friends are sending like this photograph, and that's not what we saw when we were there because the sun was at a different angle.
Oh.
And so I love that it also embraces a different idea of an exhibition as something that changes, and refuses the idea that an exhibition will always deliver the same thing, which I just think the shadows do. The shadows were like such a huge present.
Yes, and originally when we got there, the shadow was just in that corner. It wasn't spilling onto the floor at all. And when I said I was there for a few days before everyone arrived, I was noticing the shadow. It's catty corner from where my line is. It's right across. And I knew right when it was 4:16. I knew right when it was really a clock. It really is a sundial that moves through space. Of course, it changes, as Zoe said, every day. It's different. And of course, whether or not the sun is out or not. And that was just an incredible surprise for us, because when we visited, the skylight was closed, and we wanted our room to be primarily daylight, which it is. The museum stays open late, so there are electric lights as well.
Thank you all so much for these answers to this question. I'm going to jump in here and pass the mic back to Carolyn, because I believe we have a poetry reading to conclude today. We want to make sure we make time for that as well. But thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for such a rich conversation today. And we do have a tradition of ending our community events with a reading. And today I'm so thrilled to welcome writer Svetlana Kitto here to the stage. Svetlana Kitto is a writer, editor, and oral historian. Her writing has appeared in 4 columns, Guernica, Bomb, and elsewhere. Her book of interviews, Sarah Penn's Knob, Carrie, an oral history source book, formed the basis of an exhibition at the Sculpture Center in 2021. I'm really thrilled to turn it over to you, Svetlana. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, Carolyn, thank you so much. I feel so honored to have been asked to read at this event. I'm just hiding myself. That was a really interesting conversation, and I'll get right to it. This is an essay that I published, I guess, maybe in the month before the pandemic. And it's called All Mom's Friends. My parents sat us down on the edge of their bed to tell us they were separating. There was a shimmering hologram sticker of blonde-haired and blue-eyed Jesus in a white robe on the door of my dad's bedside table. I had put my fingers over it many times, trying to take Jesus into my heart like I had seen on TV. Everything I knew about America, I learned from TV. Please make sure my mom and dad don't die before I wake up. Please make sure I don't get kidnapped like the kid on Growing Pains. Thank you, Jesus. My dad also had pictures of Hindu gods all over the house and a small Buddha statue on top of his dresser. But there was nothing about them on TV. My mom was Latvian and Jewish, but none of that was on our walls. She deferred to my dad's New Age Englishness, and that was that. While my parents talked to us, holding our hands and being uncharacteristically gentle, my sister cried, and I felt something inside me warm up. I stared at my mom's pink suede and snakeskin heels on the shoe rack at the foot of the bed. She didn't wear them anymore because they destroyed her back. I wanted her to wear them so badly. I didn't want them to hurt her back, and I didn't understand how a back could hurt. My dad's back had a hurt too. Both of them had bad backs. I thought this had to do with them being more like old people than young because of all the drugs they had used before getting sober when I was 5. I didn't understand that my mom was really young. She was a really young person who wanted to be with her friends. After my parents separated, my mother moved my sister and me into a tiny 1-bedroom on Laurel Avenue in West Hollywood. Down on Sunset Boulevard, there was the Laugh Factory and Greenblatt's Deli and the Coconut Teaser, a place for grown-ups I knew. What did grown-ups do in places? Up the street the other way was Fountain Avenue and the mouth of Laurel Canyon, where I went to elementary school just on top of the hill. After school, I rode my bike up and down our block, and one day, on the corner of Fountain and Laurel, I had my first existential crisis. I looked up at the sky and thought, overwhelmed and slightly horrified, I am me. I was 9. It was a Los Angeles childhood, so a lot of our time was spent in the car, a beat up gold Corolla with a Die Yuppie Scum bumper sticker on the back. My grandmother had given my mother the car to help her start her new life, separate from my father. If it was hot, the windows would be rolled down and the AC on. My mom would either be smoking or rolling a cigarette, which she could do with one hand. We would drive all over Hollywood running errands and visiting her friends, many of them sober, some of them still using, almost all of them gay men. All the first people I loved outside of my family were gay men. It's rush hour. Sorry for the background noise. My mom's best friend, Al Babayan, was the first person close to us to go. He was Armenian and had spent most of his childhood in Glendale in Los Angeles. He had slept with Stefan, who everyone knew had HIV. Al loved the Smiths. He was very sensitive. The first thing he would do when he visited us was check on our German Shepherd Maya and make sure she had water. I was very concerned about my mom's romantic life. On the phone, I would hear her say, "I'm just so fucking lonely." I'd seen her break down in traffic in the gold Corolla. "Your fucking father, your fucking selfish father." And it was true that my dad seemed to be fine as the months went by, piling on the girlfriends who looked nothing like my blonde Jewish Latvian mother, women with names like Teresa Sullivan, Shannon O'Donoghue. Still, I couldn't understand my mom's loneliness because she had so many friends and so many people who loved her, and as a result, loved her girls. Ida and her girls had so many places to go on the weekend. In the summer, my mom's friend Tracy invited us to swim at her parents' mansion in Santa Monica Canyon. It belonged to Tracy's mother, who was the famous Hollywood actress Jean Simmons. She was never there when we were, so we could play hide and seek in all the bedrooms and eat chicken McNuggets by the pool. All of my mom's friends had a different car to ride around the city, looking out for meters that had leftover money in them, windows down and air conditioning on at the same time, music blaring. If it wasn't classical music, it was Massive Attack or Prince, who my mom and her friends loved the most. "He can play every instrument," Mom said. They were the same age. "He's a genius. You can't tell if he's gay or straight, and it doesn't matter," she said. "Everyone wants to have sex with Prince." I would rewind the tape to play Little Red Corvette, Kiss, I Would Die for You over and over, and we would all sing, "I'm not a woman, I'm not a man, I am something that you'll never understand." One day, my mom and I were driving to our bank in West Hollywood when I had a brilliant idea. "Mom," I said, "why don't you just be with a gay man? There's so many that you like." My mom paused. "Sleeping with a gay man would be like blowing your brains out with a shotgun right now," she said gravely into the rearview mirror, shifting the car into park. The year Ryan White died, my mother moved us to a new apartment in a gated community called Park La Brea. She had been promoted at the production house, and we were driving around in a newly leased Volkswagen convertible. Now, Tim or Tracy or Joelle would pile into the car, and we would drive to the beach with the top down and the AC on. Al came over to our new place once before he died. He and my mom got into a fight. She knew he had fixed by the burn mark he left on the toilet. "No junkie wants to be told they can't use," she said. I remember going to see him in hospice care in Studio City. My sister cried, and I thought about our dog, Maya. I wanted to cry so my mom knew that I cared. There was Daniel, whose rich parents bought him a house in Laurel Canyon with a beautiful pool that was like a dark lagoon, with jets that pumped warm water. My mom had told me that Daniel's parents bought him lots of things because they felt guilty, because they had never accepted their gay son, and now he was going to die. Daniel's skin was pocked, which I associated with his HIV, but I later learned they were actually acne scars. Daniel took lots of pictures of Ida and her beautiful daughters by the pool and told me I looked like a pre-Raphaelite painting. There were people who were friends of both my parents. Tim McGowan was one, and with him, my mother's relationship was a little rockier, probably because it was too much based in a shared bitterness toward my father. There was Bruce Almeida, a pastry chef from the South, who called my dad Ma Bell because he was always on the phone. There was my dad's friend, Jimmy Drinkovich, who planned to commit suicide before he got really sick. He made a promise to his lover that if he killed himself, he would tell him first so that they could go together. But in the end, he didn't tell him. With the deaths of Al and Daniel, my mom had lost her two closest friends. When she was working as an editor on the movie Mo Money, she met a successful music supervisor who was also her boss. She wasn't interested in him at first, but he wouldn't leave her alone, she said. And eventually, he has nice calves and he's nothing like your father. He wanted her to quit her job and let him take care of all of us. Soon we were living with him and his 2 sons in a big house that wasn't ours in Santa Monica. My mom started drinking again in secret. I was a teenager, so I wasn't paying attention to her anymore. I started drinking too. That's it. Thanks, y'all.
Svetlana, that was amazing. Thank you so much for closing us out today. Everybody do check out links to her work there in the chat. Thank you for an unbelievably incredible event today. Brody, Carrie, Zoe, Jo-ey, and Jill. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program, making these daily conversations possible. The recording of this conversation will be up on our YouTube channel and archive shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate and join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. on Zoom for a poetry reading curated by Ed Friedman. And feel free to now all unmute. You should be able to, if you'd like, to say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.
All.
Thank you so much.
That was
incredible.
Thank you for the reading, Svetlana. That was beautiful.
Yeah, and if you're in Paris, go see the show.